What determines a war today? The direct attack of the vital centers of an enemy.
Well, there's a reason for this lofty calm. And it's the bliss of ignorance. Winning isn't everything, but it's the only thing. In our business, there is no second place. Either you're first or you're last.
And then, if I may use a word which we use in Wisconsin, let's we have the guts to mean we should be taken down from those watchtowers and should not be representing the American people.
And there is always the possibility of effective action. The hero wants to do something, he can do something, and he actually does do something. So much of current adult literature offers us the anti-hero. I might say a hero as a clodpole, the hero as a crashing bore, or as an existential loser. The fantasy hero may lose too, but in the process, at least he has made some effort to cope with his environment. He may be a sacrificial figure, but never a passive victim. Good evening, and welcome to Of Crest and Creed podcast, a Sons of Wisconsin creation. Here we aim to culture the souls and develop a proper Wisconsin aristocracy. I'm joined this evening by my co-host, Black Paladin Noir. How are you doing tonight, Noir Paladin?
I'm doing wonderful, thank you.
And something I want to continue to kind of do is a little, whenever we have a married guest on here, to offer up some little maybe white pillings or some great stories is how did you meet your wife, Paladin?
Yeah, so I was dating the daughter of a minorly famous in Christian circles university professor, and that didn't work out. But because I was friends with her roommates originally, I got invited to the Halloween party after I'd broken up with said daughter, and she invited one of her coworkers, and that was my wife. So we met there dressed in Halloween costumes, and I asked her out. And the week that we arranged for me to, or for us to go on a date, I think I had 2 other dates that week, and yeah, the woman I ended up marrying obviously won. So
Ooh, what was your costume? What was her costume?
yeah, we didn't even know each other, so it's not like it was planned or anything like that. But it was a little bit of a Captain Hook and Tinkerbell thing, because she was like a gothic fairy, and I was Jack Sparrow.
That's perfect. So far, we've had great responses to how'd you meet your wife. That's great. Love it. He's anonymous on here, but he has quite the interesting backstory. We're gonna offline. We'll have to talk about what famous Christian person your daughter that you were dating. Good to go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Totally. All right. So this evening, kind of piggybacking off of last week's podcast on kind of definitions of fantasy, the importance, why we love it. This one's going to be kind of the subversion of it. Now, this kind of takes a grander kind of overall toll over the subversion of our current stories. Kind of highlighted last podcast. Obviously, when it comes to our fiction, you can tell that there's some subversion, or there's some, one might say a culture war, Paladin, on our fiction. And so today we're kind of looking at it because there's special cases when it comes to fantasy that kind of detracts it. There's some overlapping, but some special cases. So kind of looking through it on what subverts when it comes to fantasy, or what changes it up. I've kind of narrowed it down into my research to 3 categories. There might be more. There's some overlap here, and then the severities of them. So what I have here is woke or wokeism. I have the question of evil, we could call it, or understanding of evil. And then I have what's called verisimilitude, or you could call this world breaking, or we could call it trope breaking. We could say something that just takes us out of the fantasy of the world. And then we have the two severities. Now, what these are, there's the hard sell and it's what's called a soft sell. So I didn't partake my time in the military. I didn't partake in SEER training, but when pilots, special forces, they go through SEER training. SEER training is survival, evasion, escape, and resistance to interrogation. And part of this is you become a role player and you're captured and they interrogate you. And while you're interrogated, there's two kinds of failures in a sense. There's the hard sell and the soft sell. Hard sell is easy. It's where they interrogate you and you admit to like government secrets or military secrets or like locations. Like, yeah, here's where our base is. Here's information on our weapons, all that stuff. So stuff that you know you're not supposed to give. The soft sell is more sophisticated, we'll say. Soft sell is where they kind of interrogate you into becoming less human in a sense, or like breaking yourself. So an easy example is one of my buddies, he went through, they got him to admit to bombing innocents, right? So it's where they get you to admit, it's like they're interrogate you. You don't get tortured in SEER, but you're interrogated, you're up all night, you're listening to stupid rock music all night, and they get you to admit to killing innocents. Or another one is they do some mess around games where they pick who they're going to interrogate next. And if you're a higher ranking enlisted or an officer, the rule is you go. And what they do is they manipulate you into making it okay that like a lower airman or a lower private gets picked for special interrogation. It's like, oh, hey, you just failed because you didn't do what you're supposed to do as a higher ranking officer. So there's the stuff that's up front with wokeism, that's up front with evil, that's up front with world breaking. And then there's some stuff that's subtle that you might not realize that's happening. An easy example, not from fantasy, but something that we would never notice today is take The Simpsons, right? You could pick a whole bunch of degeneracy that's funneled through The Simpsons, whole bunch of leftist jargon that's funneled through The Simpsons at us. But the subtle thing is something like Bart calling his dad by the first name, right? So obviously a gross disrespect to the position of fatherhood, but something that you might not pick up on. Do all those categories kind of make sense, Paladin?
Your categories make total sense. What does not make sense at all is how, in a training exercise, when you know the whole thing is fake, you would admit to bombing innocents. That is pretty wild.
They're very clever with how they get you to do it. Like it's more sophisticated than you think. They'll sign a document. They'll put a document in front of you, and because you're going days without sleep, they'll put like a document in front of you, like, hey, just sign this. And so you'll read maybe some of it and it seems fine. And then you'll sign it. And then they'll flip the paper over and be like, hi, we just signed you admitting that you bombed innocents.
Oh, okay, I see. So it's like it's a trick. It's not like they so incredibly mess with your brain that by the end of the training exercise you can't tell reality from fiction.
I mean, I'm pretty sure they do. Like I said, I've
really?
never gotten to go through it. Yeah, I'm pretty sure they do. But that'll happen if you're like taking as a hostage. They'll try to get you to admit to stuff in real life. So yeah, so the idea hard sell, soft sell, it's stuff that there's the stuff that's upright in your face that you reject, but it's when they give you the little soft thing, the little nuanced thing that you don't pick up on because you're fighting the big upfront thing. So, all right, so wokeism, that one's pretty easy, right? I can pull from, I played through, like an example, I played through the Baldur's Gate 3 video game. There's some very obviously stuff. We have same-sex attraction, bad to go, right? We have other things in there, other kind of degeneracy. They try to do trans characters, bad to go. We have some races that, wouldn't obviously be part of this genre, right? Not okay. So this comes up in fantasy quite a bit, comes up in a lot of our art quite a bit. Pretty obvious. Do you have anything to say on woke?
Sure. Well, so I think that woke is a fine, just sort of I don't know, everyday colloquial term for things, but I do think it's important that people understand that behind the term is something a little bit more than just like those crazy leftists, right? When people say woke, what they're really referring to, if they whether they understand it or not, is critical theory or critical theories, actually. And that is a deep thing. And critical theory at its best, actually worst, I guess, but critical theory at its most effective, or at its sort of most crafty, that's the right word, is all about that soft sell. It's all about they're trying to understand the systems of hierarchy and authority and cultural patterns that make society and civilization strong against the things that they want, and they are trying to subvert those things from within by eating away corrosively at the foundational aspects of those things. And so your example from the Simpsons is a good one. Like, yeah, they might put a joke right in your face that is clearly shilling for some leftist cause, but there's a kind of constant undermining. Devin Stack, of course, Blackpilled, has a really great video on the Simpsons and how it's just been decades of undermining Christianity and passing God off as even like, well, even God isn't a Christian the way you guys are. And it's really quite, I mean, like, that is a very eye-opening video.
So yeah, going off the Simpson example, highlighting it again, there's some very obvious leftist, flagrant leftist promotions in the Simpsons, right? There's some flagrant degeneracy that goes on in the Simpsons, right? Same-sex couples, premarital stuff, drugs, alcohol, being drunkard, very obvious stuff. Going off of that hard sell, short sell dynamic, the short sell is just Bart's relationship with Homer, right? The flagrant, just calling, the fact that he's calling him Homer versus dad or father, right? It's the stuff you don't see up front. The same thing with woke. I see this quite a bit within our circles, and it's something we got to be defensive of, I'd argue, is because we've been hit so hard in the head with homosexuality, with transgenderism, just how flagrant it is in front of us, that when something like a Calvin Klein or what's the other one, American Eagle, I believe it was, gives us a picture of a lewd woman, we're like, oh, cool, we can find women attractive again. It's like, no, dude, that's the point. Is they're trying to break you out of that understanding that you really shouldn't be looking at these images, right? Like your eyes like that are for your wife only. And so this happened. What's funny is someone who fell victim to this was actually not to call shots, but the Daily Wire. They did that. I think it was a chocolate ad a long time ago, where they had their CEO doing all these, we could say, quote unquote, based right-wing things, right? Being a man, fighting, all this stuff. And then he's surrounded by lewd women. It's like, okay, dude, you failed the soft sell, right? You did all these based things, but now you're just surrounded by essentially prostitutes, and you just failed the soft sell. They got you into admitting this kind of lewd behavior for women that aren't your wives. And so fantasy, it's obvious. I mean, to be fair, Paladin, stuff like this was around during Conan, right? Conan was around lewd women. There's lewd dressed women in a lot of Frank Frazetta's art. But
it's about all he does.
Yeah, exactly. And so I will say there's I'm not going to say nuance, because the word nuance has been ruined. There's a level of admiration of the beauty that is a woman versus just lewdness. I don't think anyone nowadays has the IQ level to truly separate those things. So I'm going to always resort to just it's bad behavior. So in fantasy, right, taking the tropes of within wokeism, taking the tropes of like transgenderism, homosexuality, those are the easy ones. But going off of your critical theory, right, where we have very obviously, and this happens in historical fiction that's leveraged out nowadays. We have certain races that clearly wouldn't be there at that time period, right? Like if I have a fantasy novel set in medieval Europe, I'm not going to have a Latino there, right? And so it's that stuff's introduced to, like you said, critical theory, break your mind. Whereas all of a sudden it becomes normal that Latinos or African Americans or Asians were associated with this high fantasy, high period medieval Europe that weren't. So
Yeah, I think there's two ways to go about this. So, I mean, obviously, at certain times in history, there have been the kind of odd individuals from here or there, right? That for whatever reason, you know, transported way across. What the woke people often want to do with these stories, and more and more they're just doing it with like history, not just fantasy, right? Is out of their deep-seated anti-white hatred, they want to just sort of rewrite history, rewrite great stories as like, well, actually, white people had nothing to do with it, or whatever they had to do with it. They were basically just the Quislings or the evil ones, and it was all people from other races that the real heroes of the story. Um, was there some British series recently where it's like they wanted to like Queen Elizabeth was like not like there was like a black woman or something? I don't remember. Maybe I'm making that up.
I,
Um,
I don't remember. I think it was Anne Boleyn was a black woman, and then they
oh,
made
Anne Boleyn.
Cleopatra. Yeah, Cleopatra was a black woman, and it pissed off the entire country of Greece because Cleopatra was Greek.
Yeah. So yeah, obviously they started doing that with fantasy first because it's easier to do it with a story that's not real. But more and more they're just doing it with history, and yeah, it just comes from a place of they hate whites. That's what it comes down to. I don't want to be clear,
Oh,
by the way. I don't, as I'm a Christian, so I don't hate anyone because of their genetic material. But that means I don't like it when people hate white people. I don't like that either.
right. And what's funny is sometimes it's just completely unnecessary. Like Lord of the Rings, there's we could say we'll use the term race. Like in Lord of the Rings, you have races like elves and dwarves, but there's a race of man that is of a different, that's not white, but then they have to incorporate it in funky ways. So I was about to steel man it in a sense for you, Paladin. Why is it important? Because obviously the rebuttal always is, hey, this is fiction. It can be whatever we want. Why is that a poor rebuttal, or why is it still something to be apprehensive of with respect to this fantasy? Like, why can't I just make my own? Why can't I make my Harry Potter movie or TV show and have a black Snape?
Yeah. Okay, so let's go back to your hard sell, soft sell idea, right? The hard sell is we're going to make Snape, black. And it's dumb and it makes people angry, and it's meant to provoke a reaction so that then they, can, oh, what's your problem? You got a problem with that? It's intended to, it's like a school bully tactic to get somebody riled up and then turn the whole thing around on them as if they started it, right? That's the hard sell part of it. The soft sell part of it actually is the idea that your culture, your traditions, your folkways as a man of the West are nothing more than a stupid toy to be played with, changed around, manipulated into whatever, and that its real root and base is actually evil. And as a result, it's not worthy of being treated faithfully or sincerely or authentically. And that's the part that most people often don't see. That soft sell stuff happened before they started having, black Snape or, black Anne Boleyn or whatever. That soft sell stuff happened, 30, 40 years ago already.
So correct. And what's funny is I forgot to bring this up within the woke categories because we have like homosexuality, transgenderism, different races. the current hard sell right now in D&D. I don't know if you saw this, Paladin, but it's paraplegics, or it's like in D&D they have art of characters in wheelchairs. You know what I mean? And what's funny is, like, take probably one of the most famous characters in or I shouldn't say literature, in fiction, that's a paraplegic. Maybe that's the wrong term for him, but Luke Skywalker, right? Luke Skywalker lost his hand and replaced it with a robot hand, right? So there's
Yeah.
already avenues within these fictions to do something like that makes it interesting, right? Luke Skywalker got interesting when he lost his hand, right? Darth Vader's interesting when he lost his body parts and what happened to him. They put it into the story. But there's very obviously a difference between that and having a character in a wheelchair. And going off of the hard sell, now we're here combating that, being like, this is ridiculous, towards the soft sell of what's kind of being introduced in. And same vein, I'm not against anyone who has like a disability like that, right? Daredevil's a cool comic book character, and part of the brilliant part of him is his blindness, right? But it's the fact that they hamstring force feed these things to you that's very obviously part of an agenda.
Yeah. So, yeah, the hard sell is the obvious ridiculousness of the quote unquote combat wheelchair. And, by the way, that I think combat wheelchair, the whole thing's been a sort of silly trope for, I think, a long time now. Almost to the point where, there's a number of people who are just sick of talking about it. Like, yes, like just put it away, because don't let the narrative be controlled by this, right? But the soft sell is this kind of silly idea that I want to say anybody can be a hero. And this is going to sound like some people might even be offended to hear me say this, but the idea that just like, well, it doesn't take like real feats of strength or mental acuity or deep character. Anybody can be a hero just sort of by like wanting to be one. You know what I mean? Or anybody can be a hero as long as they're on the right side of history, so to speak, or the right side of the fantasy aisle. And it's just not true, right? The heroes are people of exceptional character and quality. Heroes are people who put in, the time and the training. Heroes are people who resist moral evil and, hold on to what is good, and they're morally grounded in a deep and abiding way. So, yeah, again, that's the soft sell as I would see it.
So yeah, a topic, both being Christians and both being avid members of the church, right? A topic that's very important to us is like female parishioners, right? Bible's very clear on that. No, right?
Pastors, I think we're okay with parishioners.
Oh, okay. I might be using that. I'm from a different cloth of tradition. We might use it the same. I hope my pastor, but we'll say pastor, shepherd. I know the bishops, right?
Yeah.
C.S. Lewis said female priestess, but we'll say female leadership or female pastors. And so Bible's very clear, no, right? Very clear, no. That's the hard sell, right? The soft sell is there's more categories, more requirements, more, like you said, necessity for a great man to be a pastor, that when you're here combating just degrading the requirements to male female, what kind of males, in a sense, that are unfit for the position get brought in? You know what I mean? It's very easy to, and it's required to combat female pastors, but is there a pastor who's loose-lipped, or what's another one? Like, what would be another one, Paladin, that's like double-mindedness, or, I'm trying to do categories that aren't like clear definition no's, but other kind of men of less quality. I mean, it could just be he's not up for the task, right? Like you brought up, anyone can be a hero, and there's this various levels of work that go into being a hero. Just being anyone can be a pastor, you're really selling your congregation a bad one. Like you're setting them up for failure.
Yeah. When we're talking about the overall spirit of the age, to which critical theory / wokeness is, a fundamental part of, um, I like the way that Charles Haywood likes to put it, where the spirit of the age is this idea that I should have freedom from all bonds, not self-chosen. And that's the phrase he uses. I think it's a pretty good one. And so to bring it back to fantasy here, fantasy is intended to be a world where it, as I said in the last podcast, there's it's almost more real than reality. There's a kind of hyper reality to it. Everything is things are kind of made obvious and bare in terms of the morality of the situation, the characters of I'm sorry, the quality of a person's morality and character. Um, it's all kind of just made more obvious and sort of in front most of the time. Yes, there are characters that might deceive another one, but usually the reader is in on it to a certain degree. They kind of know, oh my goodness, they're being led along, right? Um, so in that environment of fantasy, what was I saying? How do we get here? Sorry.
I'll trail you along. So an example I could bring, we could do hard sell, soft sell on this one. So Rings of Power, we took Galadriel, and Galadriel is one of, as far as fiction goes, one of like, when you find her in the Fellowship of the Ring, she's almost the epitome of, we could say, the female archetype. Like she's almost mother of the entire Middle Earth, right? And there's an aspect of the ultimate conclusion of man. The ultimate archetype is to be a form of a father figure, especially as he gets older. And the same with a mother. She becomes the mother figure. And Galadriel almost epitomizes that perfectly. Hugh in Rings of Power, we turn her into like special forces, right? So here we have, I mean, I wouldn't even say it was, I'll be frank. I did watch like 2 episodes of Rings of Power. I couldn't make it, but the part of her that's ruined is we really ruined this kind of perfect symbolism of, excuse me, when we introduce wokeness into it, we take something that's true, beautiful, and good of what's like the ultimate, I shouldn't say ultimate ends, but like the final stage of the female archetype of motherhood, and we pervert it into, now she's just like a superhuman super soldier, right? Which is something that is an aspect that we can never have. Women, no woman can be that. So we're creating this unrealistic expectation for women instead of celebrating, in a sense, a perfectly good and something to look after position for women. And so
Yeah. So I remember where I was now. So the freedom from all bonds, not self-chosen thing. So um, fantasy that actually reflects reality is going to have those duties, those responsibilities, those things that a person must do because of their station in life. Uh, and those are the things that actually we find the most compelling about those stories. That a person is driven by duty to actually do those things. Whereas from a critical theory perspective, fantasy just becomes a kind of thematic setting or thematic vehicle for simply pushing forward their own ideas about how they would like the world to be, their own ideas that I should have freedom from all bonds, not self-chosen. And so then in subversive fantasy, you have duty and responsibility actually becomes like the villain of the story instead of the noble thing that drives the protagonist to do what is right.
Yeah, correct, and absolutely, and that's how would I say this? It's going off of like our last podcast. It's the reflection of truth and good, and as you brought up, we break those bonds. That's the real danger of wokeism. It's not force feeding us. I mean, it is, but going hard sell, soft sell. It's it's blank slatism, or that anyone can be these things, or that even that God gave the responsibility to people to be these things. I mean, the truth is, take a Galadriel within their realm, within their fantasy realm. I mean, in a sense, Paladin, it is when we were talking about like taking this world to promote kind of your ideal. It is them trying to force their ideal of no, women can be super soldiers, or paraplegics can be, great warriors. And that's just not the case. And in one way, it's dangerous because you degrade people who should be doing this, right? To use the pastor example, you degrade people who would be men who would be exceptional leaders in their churches. And then the other thing is you ask of people who, when we can use women, you ask them of a standard that they're just never going to meet. And so when you break that's an aspect of breaking bonds. The other aspect of breaking bonds is kind of your responsibility to them. So if you take like roles of husband and wife, there's very concrete, you could take it biblical, you could just take it biological, concrete responsibilities that a husband has and concrete responsibilities that a wife has. Once you break those bonds and it's anyone's game, I don't know if you saw this, Pastor Paladin, but there's an increase in stay-at-home husbands, which in my mind, I just don't see how a woman would find that attractive or want that, but yet it's happening. And so you break those bonds of responsibilities, whereas you as the man, you are responsible as the provider. I'm not going to, whether women should work is a conversation for another day, but you're the provider. And once she becomes the provider, there's a ridiculous amount of responsibility that she's just not there to have. And so, as you brought up, trying to do the critical theory with their fantasy, this is where we call it shadow fantasy. You're introducing those ideals and responsibilities onto people that they just can't have. I mean, even to the man. Is that something the man can even do? Be a stay-at-home caregiver, homemaker? Is that even within his ability? I would say no.
Yeah. At the very least, it goes against type. Interestingly enough, I've been exposed to at least two, if not more, couples where from the outside looking in, it appears to have worked. But I will say that one of those relationships was a lot more opaque to me, and the one that I know a little bit more about, um, I think their marriage is solid, but certainly sometimes the woman's behavior towards other forms of authority is not always circumspect. So it has other perhaps knock-on effects.
And so kind of bringing it back to fantasy, there's an aspect of fantasy that is the ideal, right? So we'll take the Tolkien example. Aragorn is a form of ideal. Galadriel is a form of ideal. And I remember in an interview with Jordan Peterson, you should never surrender the ideal. And so when we're in fantasy, where we have the authority in a sense to set the ideal. Here's ideal good. Aragorn's the ideal government, we could say. The Shire's the ideal, we could say peace. I would say peace. The good life, we could say, is the Shire as well. Galadriel's the ideal wife, ideal mother. In fantasy, the dangers of wokeism, I would put this in the hard sell, is the surrendering of the ideal, right? And so this is the dangers of kind of wokeism into this. And I'm looking at time and we still got some time. I'm probably going to make this into other episodes because I didn't know we'd go this long on woke, I'll be honest. But I love this conversation. So now introducing kind of the race element to it. This is something separate from the ideal. There was a video that went viral, I would say a few months ago now. I don't know if you saw it, Paladin, but the talk of the Zamani, which is that in Africa, their theology is very different from ours as far as how time works. And what I noticed with that is a lot of our right wingers, guys of our sphere, they're like, "Hey, this is very different." But in the same way, they weren't. I wouldn't say jingoist, but they weren't bigoted towards it. We'll say, whereas like, "Hey, this is their culture. This is how they develop their civilization. Allow them to have this." And so, going back on the anyone can be a hero, when we take these, we'll say Western fictions or Western fantasies like a Lord of the Rings, like a Black Cauldron, and force feed into these other races, we're going back to, I guess we could say, a blank slateism, which isn't there. And we're being very destructive of not just our culture, but each other's cultures. And I'm not going to go into ranking of cultures. Here I am jingoist of my own, but there's a breaking of a bond of a people that you grew up with, of a tradition you're part of, that when I'm reading fiction or I'm watching a movie and all of a sudden there's a Latino that's part of the Western culture, even though I actually know some Latinos that are very avid in the Western culture, there is a breaking of that tradition. Thoughts on that?
Yeah. So last time we said that fantasy fantasy's purpose, fantasy stories, their purpose is to talk about the human condition and talk about human nature in a setting where they can kind of lay that bare. And the setting, in order to talk truthfully or authentically or in a way that actually resonates, you have to have a cosmology for your fantasy world that is good and true, right? Where you have a god of goodness, and then you have a dark lord, but the dark lord is not his equal. Okay, all right, we talked about that. So how that plays out, other cultures, I'm sure, have their own fantasy stories. I mean, we can think of them, and we may find them lacking to whatever degree they actually depart from that cosmology as I laid it out. But each culture is, I'm sure, going to have their own expression of the details there, or what aspects of the good and the true and the beautiful, as they say, are going to come to the fore because they're important to that people group. And this is even different between like the English and the French, So when you are trying to, subvert that with another culture, what the critical theorists are attempting to do, as I said before, is simply say your traditions, your folkways, your ideals, the things that culturally and ethnically make you a man of the West, whatever subgroup that is, those things are no good. They belong on the trash heap of history, and so we're going to try and foundationally cut them off at the knees. And that's what you can't have. Well, now what you could have, certainly, again, is a story in which there is a wanderer, or a curiosity from elsewhere, right? Historically speaking, the Romans went through a period where they were like really attracted to Nubian women for whatever reason. That's like, ooh, you have an exotic wife from Africa. That's amazing, so you could have characters like that. It's not necessarily terrible for there to be. Obviously, you don't want it to make zero sense, So if you're doing a fantasy story that is, so for instance, one of my favorite authors, Jack Vance, has a series of books. He's mostly sci-fi, but his fantasy series, Lioness, takes place on these islands that supposedly used to exist off of England, and then they end up sort of submerged like Atlantis in our own time. And so yeah, in a story like that, to have a Latino man would just be nonsense. Like there are no Latino men in off the coast of England in the year 985 or whatever, right? So it can't be ridiculous, but you could certainly have again like a wanderer figure, and that would be fine.
Right. So not fantasy totally here, but like a film, and the book is okay actually, but the film I quite adore is John McTiernan's 13th Warrior, where we have and this actually happened. We had an emissary from Baghdad, I believe it was Baghdad, get to meet the Kievan Rus Vikings, and it's a great story. The Fish Out of Water is definitely an archetypical story that exists.
Yeah.
But as you brought up, it's if I were to watch a movie on Vikings and all of a sudden they're like one of the guys is from the Middle East. It's like, okay, obviously he's not a Viking, right? And so it is an aspect of, it's maybe not the hard sell, soft sell, but it's the idea of that getting normalized to the idea of, yeah, it doesn't matter. It's blank slateism, Paladin, which I think is something that is time to wholly reject. That just anyone can be anything. I remember there's a great, love him or hate him, a great lecture from Yuri Bezmenov where he said, go to any religious text and tell me where there's equality. I mean, or where there's blank slateism, right? I may be too Hinduist on this, but I do believe that there's an element of you're put in the position that God put you in. And there's some people that are just meant to be soldiers, that are meant to be pastors. It could be biological. It could be just the family you're born into, as it used to be. That used to be the family trade, especially when it came to military, but obviously craft like blacksmithing, that was your trade that your father was a part of. And so the very obvious part is when it's obviously a narrative, when it's obviously, I haven't watched it, but you take like the Dungeons and Dragons movie that came out a few years ago now, not the 1991 with the Wayans brother, the more recent one, where it's like you have ladies doing like crazy action, right? You have people it's a very diverse cast, we'll say. That's obviously foreign to our minds when we're thinking of your medieval Europe. And so there's an aspect of
including a Latino woman.
Exactly. There's the aspect of go ahead.
I was gonna say, at least in the Dungeons and Dragons world, it's not supposed to literally be medieval Europe, so kind of all bets are off with that.
I know. Well, I mean, we could even hit that there. I remember recently, I forget how many years ago, where just Wizards of the Coast said, yeah, no more half elves, because they didn't want to use the word race anymore. And so, I mean, there's so many layers to that just in and of itself. What's funny is there's an aspect of where all of a sudden it became normal. So you take Tolkien, right? Elrond was a half elf, but to kind of dumb down what happened, his parents had to ask God permission to have children because it was so a half elf was so unfounded. In fact, it was a unique thing in and of itself. All these years later, you take a D&D fiction or anything, half elves are like so common, it's so normal. In recent like 5e, same thing happened with tieflings, where tieflings were kind of a obscure thing to be having that like infernal blood or whatnot. Where now they're just common, they're just part of it. It's like Star Trek, where they're just in the race that's part of the game. And so, in a way, when you introduce wokeness to this, going off of your fish out of water, wanderer, I don't want to say trope, but archetypical story, to not have that be special, you ruin, to take away the political propaganda, you ruin the uniqueness of the story where you do that. With like a 13th Warrior, you ruin the interesting aspect of having a man from Baghdad meet Vikings.
Yeah. By the way, I've got my Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition book here in front of me, and I'm just looking through the standard races here. And yes, Tiefling is in fact one of them. And this would be one of those kind of maybe soft sell kind of things, right? In that people often forget that there is a similar one that's good, right? It's the Ozimar, and so they have like celestial bloodline, but that's not a standard race. Just being a half demon is a standard race.
Correct.
And well, anyone who does these kind of games can conjure into their mind the sort of person who really loves to play a tiefling every single time.
Correct. And I remember, like, in one of my brother's campaigns, he enforced, hey, if you're going to be tiefling or Aasimar, there needs to be a story behind it. And there's an aspect of that that's important. So yeah, on that bombshell, Paladin, thanks for this chat. I'll be honest, this went to a far more interesting direction than I thought it would. I thought wokeism was pretty much a topic done to death, but you were able to squeeze out some interesting nuggets into there. So those other 3 ones, verisimilitude, question of evil, those will be upcoming in next episodes or so. Appreciate that, because we get to squeeze more content out of a topic we both love.
Love it.
Thank you all for joining us. Paladin, thanks for your time.
My pleasure.
All right, and we'll see you all next time. Goodbye.